Ready to find out how politics and online scandals are actually creating a more beautiful world? Here's Tara-Nicholle Nelson with Soul Tour.
How you guys doing? I'm sorry, I promised someone special I would say, how are y'all doing? Because I use a lot of y'alls in my life. So how y'all doing? Great. I am Tara-Nicholle Nelson. My talk is called Humanity is Not a Dumpster Fire, which I know is an unconventional talk title. What we're going to talk about today is how I stay so hopeful and bullish about humanity, even when the headlines are at peak toxicity, right? Now, one piece of context I need to give you about myself is that I am a long-form woman living in a short-form world, okay? My whole career has been in digital, but I've written 3 books. I wrote hundreds and hundreds of columns as a syndicated columnist for Inman News way back in the day when newspapers were paper. Y'all remember those days? So I say that as context because they told me that I have 15 minutes, and I have a lot to do. I also tell you that because I'm an ambitious woman, and I have an ambitious vision for our time here together today. And I'd like to state it, because I often like to state what my vision and mission and ambition are for a time when that I'm spending with other people. So my ambition for this talk, if I do this talk right, by the time you leave here, you will look at the headlines in a different light. You might look at the world in a different light. You might even call yourself a spiritual contrarian by the time I'm done with this talk. And that's really important because my other vision for this talk is that when you leave here, you guys will spread that to the people around you, to the people that you touch. Because real estate people, I know because I used to be one, real estate people touch people at the most transformational, intimate, pivotal points of their lives. So my vision is literally for you guys to leave here and be the outbreak monkeys for a virus of optimism and hope and meaning and purpose leaving here today, all right? That's my vision. Now, I mentioned that I used to be a real estate person. I was a columnist for many years at Inman News. I had a bunch of I was a columnist at Inman News when I was a real estate broker and a real estate lawyer. I had a bunch of life plot twists and ended up working in consumer technology as a marketing executive. So I ran content marketing at Trulia.com for a long time. Plot twist, plot twist, plot twist. Ended up as the chief marketer at MyFitnessPal. I don't know if you guys know what MyFitnessPal is, but it is the world's largest health and fitness app. It has since then become Under Armour Connected Fitness. We had about 120 million customers when I left the company. I think they're at 220 million now. I say this because in the transition from real estate to consumer technology, I noticed something, which is that every industry has its own little lingo. Right? Every industry has these inside terms and words. You guys amongst yourselves can talk about MLS and the comps and list price to sell price ratio and days on market and highest and best use and have it mean something that's different than it would mean to normies, right? To regular people just on the street. Well, we have that in consumer technology, especially in startup land too. In this valley, startup founders, startup operators, which is lingo itself, that's what we call people who run startups, VCs, we have something that we talk about amongst ourselves called the Contrarian Question. All right? Now, the Contrarian Question, contrarian in startup land does not mean what it means in regular English. In regular English, contrarian just means you're being contrary for no good reason. You just have a little attitude problem, right? In startup land, to be a contrarian is a badge of honor. The Contrarian Question is a way you measure how original and innovative your thinking is, right? The Contrarian Question seeks to get at, do you think differently than the people who have come before you? And if you do, that's kind of a signal that you might be able to build a company or a product that's different and better than the people who have come before you. There is a proper form of the Contrarian Question. There is a proper form of the answer to the Contrarian Question. So the Contrarian Question is this. What important truth do very few people agree with you on? All right? And the way you're supposed to answer the question is, most people think X, but the truth is the opposite of X. And then you proceed to tell what you know to be true that's different than what everyone else thinks. Now, I am a contrarian on many, many points and issues and subject matters in humanity, but I am, most importantly, perhaps, a spiritual contrarian. I have a really different lens and point of view on how I interpret what happens in the world, what people are doing in the world, what I read in the news, and what happens on Facebook than most people. So here's how my spiritual contrarian answer to the contrarian question. Most people think that humanity is a dumpster fire, that the world is really bad right now, and that it's getting worse fast. That is not true. Well-being is the order of this universe. Humanity is always growing, is always evolving, is always expanding. And I have ample evidence to prove it, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But that point of view means that every political headline, every political bad actor, every disaster, every bad piece of bad news that I see, I know is a collaborative component in the more beautiful world that we're all collectively creating, that we all know is possible. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Actually, let's talk about this first. It is really hard for a lot of people to get with me on this point. Many people very strongly disagree with me when I am very bullish and hopeful and optimistic about humanity based on what I see in the news. That's because of something I've started to call the outrage industrial complex. The outrage industrial complex. Listen, guys, I love media. I've been a part of media for most of my career. The stock in trade of the media is your attention. That is what it sells. That is the business model, okay? And technology knows how to create habits, knows how to get you coming back to things over and over, knows how to get you that dopamine hit that you get every time you scroll up a feed, every time you return back to read something, right? So when media and technology got married, we all should have gotten a warning about what was about to go down, all right? Now, I'm going to add one layer to that, which is that as a remnant of evolution, our brains alert to bad news, negative news, fearful news, dangerous news 5 to 6 times as intensely as to good news. All right, because when we were in the wild, being chased by the wildebeest, good news did not save your bacon, it did not save your genes, it did not save your species. All right, but being able to pay attention to bad and dangerous news is actually what perpetuates the species, or did when we were in physical danger all the time. All right, so that's why we see so many more bad headlines being reported than warm and fuzzy ones. And that's why this humanity is a dumpster fire, woe is us, everything is really bad right now, feels so real. It feels so real, but it's not true. So let me cite some evidence to prove to you my point of view that well-being is the order of the day. First, we're going to talk about the evidence that is inside your body right now. Everyone in this room, for decades, your heart has beat all night, every night, and you had nothing to do with it. I think that's really good news. I think that's incredible news, right? None of us had anything to do with that. Now let's look at the evidence that's all around us all the time. The sun rises and sets. The plants grow. The animals reproduce. And all of this happens whether we stay up at night worried about what we read on Facebook or not. None of us had anything to do with that, and it keeps happening. And I think that is massive, incredibly good news. But because it's such a part of our everyday lives, we don't see it as good news. It doesn't register as news at all. But when you think of it, it's really massive and really good. One of my teachers likes to say that if the media reported good news to bad news in the true proportions at which it really happens, you could have your TV on 24 hours a day, and once a day there'd be a swoosh across the bottom of the screen, and that would be all the bad news. that would be all the bad news, because the sun rises and sets, the plants grow, the animals reproduce, your heart beats all night, over and over again, and you don't have to do anything to make that happen, right? So there are some laws of the universe that no one can break, no matter who rigs what election, no matter what the Electoral College says. There are some laws of the universe that can never be broken. We're going to talk about two really quickly. One is the law of expansion. Coming out of the second law of thermodynamics, there is a law that we live in a universe that grows and grows and grows. It's getting bigger all the time. It's expanding all the time. Corollary, we as humans are improving all the time. Evolution is not done when it comes to humanity, all right? And I have some really great objective evidence that this is actually, humanity has only been on this ever inevitable trajectory of growth and evolution since the beginning of time. When you zoom out and take the long view, all right? Here's a few pieces of evidence. One, the chances that a human being dies a violent death are the lowest they've ever been in human history now, today. Humans are more educated than they have ever been worldwide now. Childhood mortality, lowest it's ever been in human history now. And it is true, there is a wealth gap, and the wealth gap is real. But in 1980, which I was horrified to realize yesterday was like 30-some years ago, in 1980, 50% of the developing world lived below the poverty level. Now 10% does. There is an incredibly fast-growing middle class in the developing world. That is big good news. Humanity is growing, it is evolving, it is expanding. Now, it doesn't always feel like it, and it's not a straight line of growth, and it hasn't felt like it a lot lately because we're in a cycle of contraction, right? We are in a social and cultural cycle of contraction right now. It's, really, if you just read the news a little bit, which I only read it, I give myself 17 seconds, then I move on. Racism seems like it might be flaring up. Nationalism seems like it's flaring up. There are incredibly entrenched systemic forms of injustice and violence even that have been revealed, thanks smartphones. And all of these things feel really bad, but that is a cycle of contraction, which brings me to the second law of the universe that no one can break, which is that contraction always leads to expansion. Contraction always leads to and precedes expansion. Your heart contracts before it expands. Liquids and energy contract before they expand. Markets contract before they expand. I started to give a whole diatribe on this, and I was like, I'm talking to real estate people. Nobody knows this better than real estate people. Things contract before they expand. No growth happens without any friction, without any discomfort, sometimes without any destruction, right? Think about this. One of the most vivid examples I know of is the baby chicken coming through the shell, right? So life can actually get this party started of living life. When that chick comes out of the shell, it probably doesn't feel great. It's probably pretty horrifying, actually. That's the only world that chick has ever known. It probably feels something like the end of the world as you know it, right? And we're in a contraction cycle right now that to many of us feels like the end of the world as we know it, because it is the end of the world as we know it, right? It is the end of the world as we've known it, because we're creating a new world. Because in the spiritual contrarian's point of view, contraction, expansion is the same thing as problems have solutions. Big problems have big solutions, and every single part of a problem is part of the solution. So what I want to do now is walk through 4 really quick problem-solution storylines that are happening right now in our headlines that we are all watching take place in real time. So, sexual harassment, gender discrimination, gender inequality, the gender pay gap, these things have been entrenched and pervasive in America since America has been a thing, okay? This is like nothing new. I don't know if anyone here saw RBG, the film. Loved it, love her. I was taken aback by this one fact of that in that movie where they mentioned that the first lawsuit that she brought to the Supreme Court when she was a lawyer to start her life's mission of like systematically dismantling legally backed gender inequality was in 1976. I was one in 19, I'm a grandmother. I was 1 year old in 1976, right? This has always been the case. But some things happened in the last few years. Some candidates for some elections said some things that actually kind of sparked a real change, a real outcry. They were kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And so we saw women marching all over this country. We saw the Me Too campaign, which I tell you what, many of us have always known that this issue was a pervasive issue. I don't think anyone knew exactly how pervasive. I don't think, for sure, most men didn't. I don't think most women did either. And that was like the beauty of the Me Too campaign was the veil is gone. We see it. We know it. It is not an exceptional experience. It is pervasive. It is systemic, right? And now that we see it, we can address it. And hey, this, like I said, none of these problem-solution storylines we're going to talk through right now are done with. The solution is not set in stone, but we are seeing hopeful tendrils already start. I'm seeing people run their businesses differently and have very frank conversations about all sorts of issues underlying the genders in the workplace. I have seen very close friends of mine who were men examine their own past and present behavior under a really close light. I've seen some of them who actually were committing bad behavior openly receive the consequences of that behavior. And that's past and present, but I'm also so hopeful about what I'm seeing come out of Me Too for the future. I'm seeing people raise their children at a different level of consciousness. I'm seeing people have conversations with their little boys they would never have had before this campaign. And so I think we're going to see a generation of ever more conscious men and women as a result of the Me Too campaign. Now, Facebook. So Facebook had a little thing happen. You guys might have heard about it. Let's talk about Facebook. So there was this guy, and he started a company, and it got really big. Like 2 billion people big. Like bigger than any country in the world big. And so a thing happened where, like, probably accidentally, but definitely for money, they helped a crooked ad agency elect the leader of the United States. And then Congress heard about it, and they called him up to ask him a bunch of questions that actually didn't have anything to do with the issue, which was super odd. And then since then, we've seen this guy have kind of a really long, really public, my bad, mea culpa, oh my gosh, what did we participate in moment. Now, the impact of Facebook on our culture is not done and gone with, but what I saw happen in the wake of this was a bunch of people get clear that everything they see on Facebook is not gospel truth, right? A bunch of people start questioning, start fact-checking before they spread things. I've seen a bunch of people get real with themselves and call themselves out on their biases and bubbles, right? They maybe haven't fixed it yet. They don't know exactly what to do about it yet, but I've seen a bunch of people decide that this technology is going to be their servant and not their master. Right? So we've seen people, hey, if we've got a bubble, maybe at least we can use the bubble to connect and build tribe, to signal out to other struggling souls who feel the same way that we do on issues. Right? Maybe we can use this technology as our servant. And when we feel strongly about something that needs fixing in this world, use the bubble to actually create a solution to it. All right, now, really quick, let's talk about women politicians in America in 2018. I don't know if y'all have heard, but this is a record year for women running for Congress in America. It is a record year for women running for political office at every level of this nation. And a lot of them are probably going to win. They're not just running, they are already winning their primaries. They are winning votes from across the aisle, which is a big thing, because that means lots of people want change, not just people on one side. And they're not just winning their primaries, they're winning them by very large margins. And when they do this, they are running in a very different way. They are bringing their real lives and babies and real selves and real bodies and who they really are to work, even on the campaign trail, in a way that wasn't possible for previous generations of women to do and succeed. This is Stacey Abrams, who is very likely going to be the governor of Georgia. Also, let me just point out, this woman is the first black woman major party candidate for governor ever in any state. In any state. This is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's 28 years old. The New York Times just said she has kickstarted a political tsunami by beating her opponent, who was the fourth-ranking House Democrat, a 10-term incumbent, not 10-year incumbent, 10-term incumbent, 28 years old. So, guys, yes, the election's still a few months away. It remains to be seen who will win and who will lose. On sheer statistics, this will be a record year for women politicians and women leadership in America. And I don't think we'd be here without the contraction of the last election cycle. I think it activated and galvanized a whole new generation of fearless. Alexandria, when you ask her to describe herself, she says, I'm unapologetic. Unapologetic, fierce women leaders. And I am really running out of time, but I'm going to talk about this one other woman leader who you've never heard of and you never will. This is my friend Anne Van Gelder. She lives in Piedmont, California, with her husband Dirk and their kids. After the election, her kids were a little upset and trying to figure out what they could do. So they found this art and turned it into yard signs and sold it for $10 and gave everything above their cost to the ACLU. So she printed 100 signs and thought, this is like a big thing I'm helping my kids do. And then she printed 200 and 500 and 5,000. They have sold thousands of signs, so many that she's actually now outsourced this in different states to different people. It has kickstarted this whole local movement around kindness and connection with people, with your tribe. So I will close with this. One of my teachers, her name is Clarissa Pinkola Estes. She wrote this amazing book in the 70s called Women Who Run with the Wolves, which you might have read. She also wrote something in the 80s called A Letter to a Young Activist, which I think is really relevant now. And what she likes to say is that one of the most comforting and powerful things that you can do in troubled times is to stand up and show your soul. Because soul on deck shines like gold in dark times. She talks about how in a storm, a great ship is safest when it's moored in harbor, but that's not what great ships are for. They're not meant to be moored, they're meant to be out there when things get challenging. So I love that quote. I find it super galvanizing. The only thing is I disagree with her about the dark times and troubled times. We're not in troubled times. We are in the contraction that has to precede expansion because it is universal law. That's it for me. Thanks, guys.